My name is Amelia, and at 27, I've been a surgical nurse for the past 5 years, saving every extra penny toward my dream of owning a home. After countless double shifts and skipping vacations, I finally saved $78,000. My dad was always my hero, the one person I trusted completely until last month. That's when he casually announced he'd used my life savings to buy my younger sister Jessica a brand new Mercedes. She needs it now, and you'll earn more, he said with a dismissive shrug. Before I tell you how I discovered my family's betrayal, let me know where you're watching from. And hit that like button if you've ever had a family member take advantage of your kindness. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in what most people would consider a typical middle-class family. My father, Thomas, built a successful career as a real estate broker, while my mother, Diana, worked as an elementary school teacher. On the surface, we looked like the perfect American family, complete with a beautiful colonial-style house in the suburbs and annual summer vacations to the beach. But beneath that picture-perfect facade lay a family dynamic that always left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. My sister Jessica, 5 years younger than me, was undeniably the golden child from the moment she was born. I still remember the day my parents brought her home from the hospital, my father cradling her like she was made of porcelain, his eyes filled with a kind of wonder I had never seen directed at me. As we grew up, the pattern of favoritism became impossible to ignore. When it came time for back-to-school shopping, Jessica always received brand new clothes from the trendy stores at the mall, while I got practical items from department store sales. "You're so responsible with your things, Amelia," my mother would say, as if my practicality justified the inequality. The same disparity applied to electronics birthday parties and pretty much anything else you could imagine. Jessica got the latest iPhone as soon as it was released. I kept the same phone until it literally stopped functioning. Her birthday parties were elaborate affairs with professional entertainers and custom cakes. Mine were simple gatherings with homemade decorations. Whenever I gathered the courage to point out this unfair treatment, I was immediately shut down. "Be the bigger person, Amelia," my father would say with a stern look. "Your sister needs more support. Things just come easier to you." And somehow my academic success and responsible nature became reasons to give me less rather than reasons to celebrate my achievements. My mother was no better, though her enabling took a quieter form. She would occasionally slip me small gifts when my father wasn't around, as if these secret tokens could make up for the obvious imbalance in our family. Sometimes I caught a look of guilt in her eyes when my father lavished attention on Jessica, while ignoring my accomplishments, but she never once stood up for me. By the time I reached high school, I had accepted my role in the family. I maintained perfect grades, joined every academic club possible, and worked part-time at the local pharmacy to save money for college. Meanwhile, Jessica struggled academically, but excelled socially constantly, surrounded by friends and admirers who were drawn to her outgoing personality and the generous allowance that funded her social life. My high school graduation came and went with minimal fanfare, despite being class valedictorian. My parents attended the ceremony, of course, but the celebration afterward was brief, since they had to get Jessica to her dance recital that evening. My graduation gift was a practical set of luggage for college, which I genuinely appreciated, but couldn't help comparing to what would come later. 4 years later, when Jessica graduated high school with barely passing grades, my parents threw her an extravagant party and gifted her a brand new Volkswagen Jetta. I was home from college for the event, watching from the sidelines, as my sister squealed with delight over her new car. I had just completed my nursing degree with honors, working 30 hours a week throughout my college years to minimize student loans. My graduation gift had been a nice watch, which cost a fraction of Jessica's car. "Your sister needs the confidence boost," my father explained when he caught me staring at the new car. "College will be challenging for her, and she needs to start on the right foot. You've always been so self-sufficient, Amelia. We're so proud of how independent you are." Those words stung more than any outright criticism could have. My independence wasn't a choice. It was a necessity born from years of emotional neglect. My academic success and responsible nature weren't innate gifts, but hard-won achievements earned through late-night studying after work shifts. Yet somehow, in my family's eyes, these qualities made me less deserving of support. It was during my college years that I discovered my passion for healthcare. Working as a nurse's aide to pay for school, I found purpose in helping patients through their most vulnerable moments. The hospital became a place where my attention to detail and responsible nature were assets rather than reasons to overlook me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly valued. After graduation, I made a promise to myself that I would never again depend on my family for anything. I would build my own life, create my own success, and eventually have the financial security that would free me from ever needing their support. I swore that no matter what happened, I would never allow myself to be vulnerable to their disappointment again. When I moved into my first apartment after college, a tiny studio with barely enough room for a bed and a desk, I felt a freedom I had never known before. The space was entirely mine. No one could claim priority over the bathroom, change the television channel without asking or comment on my schedule. I painted the walls a soft blue that reminded me of the ocean, hung fairy lights around the windows, and for the first time felt truly at home. Little did I know that even as I was building my independence, the patterns established in my childhood would continue to shape my family relationships in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The seeds of what would eventually become the ultimate betrayal were already planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom. My first nursing job at Memorial Hospital started just 2 weeks after college graduation. I was assigned to the general medical unit, working the night shift, like most new graduates. The hours were brutal. The work was physically demanding, and the emotional toll of caring for seriously ill patients was sometimes overwhelming. But I loved every minute of it. For the first time in my life, I was being recognized for my capabilities rather than taken for granted. During orientation, I created a detailed financial plan. My starting salary was $62,000 annually, which felt like an astronomical sum after years of part-time minimum wage work. I calculated my essential expenses: rent for my studio apartment, student loan payments, health insurance, groceries, and a modest car payment for my used Honda Civic. After covering the necessities, I allocated 90% of what remained to savings, leaving myself just enough for occasional coffee with coworkers and the streaming service that helped me unwind after difficult shifts. My goal was clear: save $100,000 for a down payment on a modest home. In the Portland area, this would be just enough to get me started in one of the more affordable neighborhoods. I created a spreadsheet that tracked every dollar, projecting that with disciplined saving and eventual pay increases, I could reach my goal within 6 to 7 years. What my spreadsheet didn't account for was just how many sacrifices this plan would require. While my nursing colleagues treated themselves to weekend getaways, new wardrobes, and regular nights out, I lived as frugally as possible. I brought homemade lunches to every shift, found free activities for my rare days off, and learned to cut my own hair to save on salon visits. When friends invited me on a group trip to Mexico, I declined adding the money I would have spent to my growing savings account instead. After 2 years of dedicated work, I was promoted to the surgical unit, where the pace was faster and the technical challenges greater. The promotion came with a welcome salary increase, pushing me closer to my goal. I celebrated by treating myself to a nice dinner alone at a local restaurant, the first time I had eaten out in months. The following day, I increased my automatic savings transfer to account for the raise, ensuring that lifestyle inflation wouldn't derail my plans. During these years, I became close friends with Natalie, a fellow nurse who admired my financial discipline, but constantly urged me to find better balance. "You need to live a little, Amelia," she would say, as I declined yet another invitation to join her for happy hour. "All this saving is admirable, but what's the point if you're missing out on your 20s? I appreciated her concern but remained steadfast. "I'm investing in future freedom," I would explain. "A few years of sacrifice now means a lifetime of security later." What I didn't share with Natalie was how deeply my childhood experiences had shaped this mindset, how the constant message that I deserved less than my sister had transformed into a determination to provide for myself what my family never would, To maximize my savings, I found a two-bedroom apartment to share with two other healthcare workers who worked opposite shifts. The arrangement wasn't ideal, our schedules rarely aligned, and sometimes someone would be trying to sleep while another was getting ready for work. But sharing housing expenses allowed me to add several hundred more dollars to my savings each month, accelerating my timeline. Every $1,000 milestone in my savings account felt like a personal victory. When I hit $25,000 after 2 years of intense frugality, I allowed myself a small celebration, buying a good bottle of wine and calling my parents to share the news. Their reaction was typically underwhelming. "That's nice, dear," my mother said distractedly. "Did you hear that Jessica made the dean's list this semester? We're taking her to Cancun as a reward." I hadn't known Jessica was even close to making the dean's list, having heard mostly about her sorority parties and the new friends she was making at the state university. I also couldn't help but note that my academic achievements had never warranted tropical vacations. But I swallowed the hurt, congratulated my sister, when she came to the phone and recommitted to my independence the moment we hung up. As I continued saving, reaching $50,000 by the end of my 4th year as a nurse, Jessica's financial story took a very different direction. Through occasional family dinners and my mother's frequent calls, I learned that Jessica had maxed out 3 credit cards during her sophomore year, resulting in my parents paying off nearly $15,000 of debt. The following year, she failed several classes after rarely attending, requiring an extra semester to graduate with my parents, covering the additional tuition. "Your sister is just finding her way," my father explained during a rare one-on-one lunch when he was in Portland for a real estate conference. "Not everyone has your natural discipline, Amelia. We need to support her through these growing pains." I nodded and changed the subject, but internally my resentment grew. The growing pains my parents so generously accommodated for Jessica would have been unthinkable for me. Had I come to them with credit card debt or failed classes, I had no doubt their response would have been lectures about responsibility and consequences, not unconditional bailouts. By early last year, the 5th year of my savings journey, I had accumulated $78,000. The end goal was in sight, and I began casually browsing real estate listings online, imagining which neighborhoods might become my future home. I calculated that within 8 more months, I would reach my target of $100,000, enough for a 20% down payment on a modest starter home in one of Portland's up-and-coming areas. The thought of having my own home, a permanent space that was entirely mine, sustained me through 12-hour shifts and overnight rotations. I imagined a small garden in the backyard, a kitchen where I could finally try the recipes I had been collecting, and perhaps most importantly, a place where I would never again feel like a guest or an afterthought. The excitement of being so close to my goal made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. What I didn't realize then was that while I was meticulously building my future dollar by dollar, forces beyond my control were already in motion. The safety net I had so carefully constructed was far more fragile than I knew, vulnerable to the same family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. My dream was within reach, but so was the nightmare I never saw coming. The text message from my father came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was taking my lunch break at the hospital. "Family dinner tonight at 6:30. Your mother is making your favorite lasagna. Important family news to share." The message struck me as odd, given that our family dinners typically happened on Sundays, and rarely with such short notice. Still, I replied that I would be there, rearranging my evening plans with Natalie. When I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, the first thing I noticed was a gleaming white Mercedes parked in the spot where my father's SUV usually sat. His vehicle had been moved to the street to make room for this luxury car that seemed wildly out of place in our middle-class neighborhood. For a moment, I wondered if one of my father's wealthy clients was visiting, though that would be unusual for a family dinner. As I walked up the front path, the front door flew open, and Jessica burst out, practically bouncing with excitement. At 22, my sister still had the exuberance of a teenager, especially when she was the center of attention. "Amelia, you're here. Did you see it? Did you see my graduation present?" She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the white Mercedes. "Can you believe it? Dad said I needed something reliable for my new job. It's a C-class. Feel how soft the leather is. I stood frozen, staring at the car that must have cost at least $60,000, if not more. Jessica had graduated college just last month, finally completing her degree, after 5.5 years of changing majors and retaking failed courses. The entry-level marketing job she had secured paid barely enough to cover apartment rent, let alone a luxury vehicle. It's very nice. I managed following her to the driver's side where she enthusiastically demonstrated the various features. I didn't realize Dad was planning such an extravagant gift. Oh, he said it was time I had something really nice for all my hard work, Jessica said, completely missing the irony of her statement. Come inside, Mom made your favorite food. Dinner was surreal. My mother's lasagna, which had indeed once been my favorite, sat heavily in my stomach as my parents and Jessica chatted enthusiastically about her new job and apartment. I contributed minimally to the conversation, still distracted by the luxury vehicle parked outside and the growing sense that something wasn't right. It was only after dessert was served that my father cleared his throat and turned to me with what I would later recognize as forced casualness. Amelia, I've been meaning to tell you. I had to make a temporary adjustment to your savings account. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed his words. My savings account. What kind of adjustment? Well, with Jessica starting her new position and needing reliable transportation, I had to move some funds around, just temporarily, of course. He took a bite of chocolate cake as if what he was saying was completely normal. The Mercedes was actually a very good deal. The dealer is a client of mine. My mind raced back to 2 years earlier, when I had been hospitalized briefly for appendicitis. During my recovery, I had authorized my father to access my main savings account in case any medical bills needed immediate payment while I was incapacitated. I had trusted him completely, then never thinking to revoke the access afterward. Dad, I said slowly, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Exactly how much did you take from my account? He frowned slightly at my choice of words. I didn't take anything, Amelia. I'm just borrowing the funds until Jessica gets settled. Approximately $65,000. It's not like you needed it immediately. $65,000. 5 years of double shifts missed its social events, and relentless saving gone in an instant. More than 80% of my home down payment fund used to buy my sister a luxury car she hadn't earned and couldn't afford to maintain. You used my savings to buy Jessica a Mercedes, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Without asking me, my mother jumped in, her tone placating. Sweetheart, we know how hard you've worked, but Jessica really needed this boost to start her career properly. First impressions are so important in marketing, and showing up in a nice car makes such a difference. And you know your sister has always struggled more than you, my father added, as if that justified everything. This job is her big chance, and we needed to set her up for success. You're established in your career. You'll earn that money back in no time with your nursing salary. The room began to spin slightly as the full impact of what they had done hit me. They hadn't just taken my money. They had dismissed 5 years of my life as insignificant. The countless nights I'd worked while exhausted, the friendships that had faded because I never had time. The small pleasures I denied myself, all reduced to, you'll earn it back. Across the table, Jessica was obliviously scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that her shiny new car had been purchased with my sacrifices. Did she even know where the money had come from? Or had my parents presented it as their gift, another in the lifelong series of advantages they had given her at my expense? In that moment, I faced an internal battle between my instinct to explode in justified rage and my lifelong habit of swallowing pain to keep the peace. The familiar pressure to be the bigger person warred with the overwhelming sense of violation. I felt physically ill, my chest tight and stomach churning. I need to go, I finally said, standing abruptly. My mother looked concerned, but my father merely seemed annoyed by my reaction. Don't be dramatic, Amelia, he said dismissively. It's just money, and family is more important. We'll sort out the details later. I didn't trust myself to respond. Grabbing my purse, I walked out without another word, the cheerful goodbye calls from my oblivious sister following me to the door. The drive home in my 12-year-old Honda was a blur, tears making the streetlights smear across my vision. I had to pull over twice when the crying made it impossible to see the road. By the time I reached my apartment, my shock had begun to crystallize into something harder and colder. That night, I couldn't sleep. I logged into my bank account confirming what I already knew. A withdrawal of $65,000 had been made 3 days earlier. The transaction description simply read, "Transfer to checking," with my father's name. So casual as if he were moving his own funds between accounts. As dawn broke, I sat at my small kitchen table surrounded by bank statements and the shattered remains of my 5-year plan. The money represented more than dollars and cents. It was my independence, my security, my proof that I could provide for myself what my family had always withheld. And now, like so much else in my life, it had been redirected to Jessica without a second thought. By morning, the shock had hardened into resolve. This would not stand. For once in my life, I would not be the bigger person, would not sacrifice my needs for Jessica's wants. For the first time, I would put myself first, even if that meant severing the family bonds that had always been more like chains than connections. For the first time in my 5-year nursing career, I called in sick to work the next morning. My supervisor, concerned by the uncharacteristic request, asked if everything was okay. "Family emergency," I replied, the words feeling both true and grossly inadequate. "I need today to sort some things out." Once my shift was covered, I began methodically researching my options. The first call was to my bank, where I scheduled an appointment with a manager for later that morning. I dressed carefully in professional attire, as if preparing for battle rather than a banking consultation. The branch manager, a sympathetic woman in her 50s, listened carefully as I explained the situation. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as I described how my father had accessed my account without permission, despite having legitimate access credentials. "Unfortunately, Ms. Jackson, since your father is listed as an authorized user on the account, this technically doesn't qualify as unauthorized access from a legal standpoint," she explained gently. "While morally this is clearly wrong, banking regulations consider his transactions authorized since you previously granted him access." "So there's nothing I can do to get my money back?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the sinking feeling in my chest. "Through banking channels alone, it's complicated," she admitted. "You could potentially pursue civil action, though that would involve suing your father directly. What I can do immediately is remove his access from all your accounts and help you establish new accounts that only you can access." We spent the next hour closing my compromised savings account and opening new accounts at a different bank entirely, one my father had no relationship with. I transferred my remaining $13,000 to the new account, along with setting up new direct deposit information for my paychecks. My next call was to a lawyer who specialized in family financial disputes. The consultation fee of $300 felt painful given my depleted savings, but I needed to understand my legal options. The attorney, a direct woman named Linda, didn't sugarcoat the situation. "You have grounds for a civil suit," she explained, "but I want to be clear about what that entails. You would be suing your father for the full amount plus potential damages. This would almost certainly permanently damage your family relationship, and the case could take months or even years to resolve." "And the chances of success?" I asked. "With the evidence you've described, we have a reasonable case, but it's not guaranteed. The joint access complicates things, and family financial matters can be messy in court. Do you have any documentation that this money was specifically being saved for a home purchase? Anything in writing from your father acknowledging this purpose?" I shook my head. My careful planning had been private, my spreadsheets and goals never formally shared with my parents. They knew I was saving, but had never shown enough interest to discuss the details. "Take some time to consider if pursuing legal action is worth the potential costs, both financial and emotional," Linda advised. "In the meantime, document everything. Save text messages, emails, record conversations if legally permitted in your state. If you decide to proceed, we'll need all the evidence we can get." By the afternoon, I was mentally exhausted, but clear on my path forward. Legal action would be my last resort, but I would not rule it out. More immediately, I needed to secure my independence and establish unbreachable boundaries. That evening, Natalie came over after her shift, bringing takeout Chinese food and a sympathetic ear. As I recounted the events of the family dinner, her expression shifted from disbelief to outrage. "They stole from you," she said flatly. "I don't care if he technically had access. This was theft, Amelia. And the fact that they don't even see what they did wrong makes it worse." "I know," I said, pushing rice around with my chopsticks, appetite gone. "The question is what to do now." "You can stay with me while you figure it out," Natalie offered immediately. "My second bedroom is just storage right now, but we can clear it out this weekend. You shouldn't be alone dealing with this." Her generosity brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you. I might take you up on that." That night, I created a concrete exit strategy. First, I would secure a new place to live, preferably in another part of the city, away from my parents' regular haunts. Second, I would look into travel nursing positions that could potentially increase my income while giving me physical distance. Third, I would methodically remove my essential belongings from my apartment in case my parents tried to insert themselves further into my life. The next morning, I discovered that the travel nursing agency I contacted had an urgent opening for a surgical nurse in Seattle, offering a substantial pay increase, plus housing allowance. The timing felt almost too perfect to be coincidence, as if the universe were offering an escape route. I submitted my application immediately. Over the following 3 days, I systematically prepared for my departure, while ignoring the increasing number of calls and texts from my family. My father's messages shifted from dismissive, "You're overreacting," to confused, "Why aren't you answering?" to angry, "This is extremely childish behavior." My mother's were pleading, "Please talk to us, we're worried." Jessica remained oblivious, sending a selfie with her new car, asking if I wanted to go for a drive together. Each message strengthened my resolve. None showed any real understanding of what they had done, or the violation I had experienced. In their world, taking my money without permission was simply part of the family dynamic, where Jessica's needs would always supersede mine. The travel nursing position was confirmed with a start date in 2 weeks. I gave notice at my apartment, arranged for my furniture to be sold or stored, and packed only what would fit in my car. The most painful part was sorting through family photos, deciding which memories were worth preserving, and which should be left behind like the relationships they represented. Before leaving Portland, I wrote a letter that I would mail from Seattle explaining my decision to cut contact. I outlined precisely what my parents had done, how it had affected me, and what would be required for any potential reconciliation in the future: full repayment of the stolen funds, acknowledgement of the pattern of favoritism, and family counseling. The conditions felt both necessary and impossible, given my family's entrenched dynamics. The night before my departure, my phone lit up with an unprecedented number of calls and texts. Apparently, my parents had finally visited my apartment, only to be told by the manager that I had given notice and would be moving out. Their messages ranged from concerned to frantic, but I recognized the manipulation behind their sudden urgency. For years, my needs had been secondary, my feelings inconsequential. Only now that I was asserting independence did they show this level of interest in my whereabouts. I turned off my phone and finished packing my car under the cover of darkness, ready to drive away from the only city I had ever called home and the family that had never truly seen me. Driving north on Interstate 5 towards Seattle, I experienced a contradictory rush of emotions. The overwhelming sense of freedom of finally taking control of my life, mixed with profound grief for the family relationships I was leaving behind. Even through their betrayal, part of me still yearned for the parental love and support I had always craved, but rarely received. The 4-hour drive gave me time to process these feelings, the steady rhythm of highway miles, marking the physical distance, growing between my past and future. By the time the Seattle skyline appeared on the horizon, I felt a cautious optimism beneath my exhaustion. The travel nurse agency had arranged temporary housing in a furnished apartment near the hospital. The space was impersonal but clean, with basic amenities and a view of downtown that sparkled at night. It would serve as my base for the 3-month contract, with potential to extend if things worked out well. My first day at Northwest Memorial Hospital was a welcome distraction from personal turmoil. The surgical unit was busier than my previous position with more complex cases and advanced procedures. The staff welcomed me with professional courtesy, and I threw myself into learning new protocols and systems. "You picked up our procedures faster than any travel nurse we've had," commented Sophia, the charge nurse, after my first week. "Most people take at least 2 weeks to get comfortable with our electronic charting system." "I appreciate that," I replied, surprised by the compliment. Years of being overlooked by my family had made genuine recognition feel almost uncomfortable. "I'm just trying to pull my weight." "Well, you're doing more than that," Sophia assured me. "The surgeons have already mentioned how precise your prep work is. If you ever want to consider a permanent position here, let me know." These small affirmations helped heal something inside me. In Portland, I had been competent, but somewhat invisible, one of many nurses doing their jobs well. Here, with fresh eyes evaluating my skills, I was being seen and valued in ways that felt revolutionary. The higher salary of travel nursing combined with the provided housing meant my savings began rebuilding more quickly than I had anticipated. Each paycheck allowed me to add significant amounts to my new savings account, the numbers climbing steadily toward a revised goal of $120,000. The increased target reflected Seattle's higher housing costs, but also my determination to create an unassailable financial foundation. 2 weeks after arriving in Seattle, I began weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Martin, a psychologist specializing in family trauma. Initially skeptical about the process, I found myself unwinding decades of complex emotions during our conversations. "What you're describing is a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic," Dr. Martin explained during our third session. "Families often unconsciously assign these roles to children, and they can persist well into adulthood." "But why?" I asked. "What did I do to become the scapegoat?" "Nothing," she said firmly. "These roles aren't based on anything you did or didn't do. They're about the parents' own unresolved issues being projected onto their children. Your responsibility and self-sufficiency may have actually reinforced the pattern, giving your parents permission to focus resources on your sister." These insights didn't immediately heal the hurt, but they provided a framework for understanding what had happened beyond simply feeling victimized. I began recognizing how deeply the family dynamic had shaped my self-perception and life choices, from my career in caregiving to my relentless drive for financial independence. Meanwhile, the messages from my family continued with increasing desperation. My father's tone had shifted from anger to concern, claiming they were considering filing a missing persons report, despite clear evidence that I had moved voluntarily. My mother sent tearful voicemails begging me to at least confirm I was safe. Jessica remained seemingly unaware of her role in the situation, her messages focusing on her new job challenges and social life, with occasional questions about when I would get over being mad. I maintained my silence, not yet ready to engage with any of them. The letter I had written was scheduled to arrive at my parents' house approximately 1 month after my departure, giving me time to establish my new life before potentially dealing with their reactions. While I had blocked my family on social media, mutual acquaintances occasionally forwarded me screenshots of Jessica's posts, each one a fresh reminder of the injustice. There she was posing beside the Mercedes that my sacrifices had purchased, captioning the image "blessed" with a heart emoji. Another showed her at an expensive restaurant, treating myself after a hard week, while wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. 3 months into my self-imposed exile, an unexpected development occurred. Through a nursing school friend still in Portland, I learned that my father's real estate business was facing serious difficulties. Apparently, a major development project he had invested in had collapsed amid allegations of permit violations, leaving him exposed to significant financial penalties. The timing couldn't have been worse, coming right after spending $65,000 on Jessica's car. Shortly after hearing this news, I received my first direct message from my mother that acknowledged wrongdoing. "Amelia, I know we hurt you deeply, and I am so sorry for my part in it. Things are difficult here right now, but that's no excuse. I miss you, and hope someday you'll let me explain. Love, Mom." The message triggered complex feelings. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction that my father was facing consequences, while another part still cared enough to worry about my family's well-being. I drafted several responses, but ultimately sent none, not yet ready to reopen communication when the wounds were still so raw. As my initial 3-month contract neared its end, Northwest Memorial offered to extend for another 6 months with a small salary increase. I accepted immediately, having found both professional fulfillment and emotional breathing space in Seattle. My apartment lease was extended, and I began cautiously putting down roots, joining a running group, and occasionally socializing with coworkers after shifts. The holiday season arrived, bringing the additional emotional weight of spending Christmas alone for the first time. Rather than dwelling on what I had lost, I volunteered to work Christmas Day, allowing colleagues with children to be home. The patients, many feeling their own sense of isolation during the holidays, seemed especially grateful for care delivered with compassion. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the wavering voice of my maternal grandmother came through the line. "Amelia, it's Grandma Rose. I hope it's all right that I called. Your mother finally told me what happened with your savings, and I wanted you to know I'm on your side in this. What they did wasn't right." Her words broke something open inside me, the validation from a family member I had always respected bringing unexpected tears. We talked for nearly an hour, her steady voice offering the unconditional support I had always craved from my parents. "You stand your ground, sweetheart," she said before we hung up. "Sometimes family needs to learn hard lessons about respect and boundaries. I'm proud of you for valuing yourself enough to set those boundaries." As the new year began, I felt stronger and more centered than I had in months. The acute pain of betrayal had mellowed into something more manageable, a dull ache rather than a sharp stab. I was building a life defined by my own choices, rather than family expectations, and that realization brought a sense of peace I had never known before. What I didn't realize was that the ultimate confrontation was still to come, forced by circumstances I couldn't have predicted, and revealing truths about my family that would forever change how I understood our shared history. 6 months after leaving Portland, I was finishing a 12-hour shift when the unit secretary called me to the front desk. "Someone's here asking for you," she said, her expression concerned. "He says he's your father." My stomach dropped. I had known this moment might come eventually, but I hadn't expected it here in the professional space I had claimed as my own. Taking a deep breath, I asked her to direct him to the hospital cafeteria where we could speak privately. Thomas Jackson looked markedly different from the confident, somewhat domineering father I remembered. His face appeared gaunt, with new lines etched around his eyes, and his normally immaculate clothing seemed slightly rumpled, as if he had been driving for hours. When he saw me approaching in my scrubs, he stood awkwardly, his usual commanding presence diminished. "Amelia," he said, his voice catching slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "What are you doing here, Dad?" I asked, maintaining a professional distance across the table. "How did you even find me?" "Your grandmother," he admitted. "I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." He paused, seemingly struggling with what to say next. "You look well. The hospital seems nice." "It is." I kept my responses minimal, unwilling to ease his discomfort. "I assume you didn't drive 4 hours for small talk." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "No, I didn't. Amelia, I know what I did was wrong. Taking your savings without real permission it was inexcusable. I've come to ask if there's any way we can work toward reconciliation." Is this apology because you genuinely understand what you did, or because you're facing financial problems and need something from me? I asked, the directness of my question surprising even myself. His flinch told me I had hit close to home. "Things have been difficult," he admitted, "but that's not the only reason I'm here. Your mother is devastated by your absence. We all are. Even Jessica misses you, though she still doesn't fully understand what happened." "You never told her where the money for her car came from, did you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," he admitted, looking down at his hands. "I should have, but I didn't want to burden her with guilt. That was my mistake to bear." "One of many," I noted coldly. "So what exactly do you want from me, Dad? Forgiveness alone, what?" The bluntness of my question seemed to break through some internal barrier. My father's carefully maintained facade crumbled, and for perhaps the first time in my life, I saw raw vulnerability in his expression. "We need help, Amelia," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's falling apart. Jessica wrecked the Mercedes 2 months ago. She was texting and hit a guardrail. She's fine physically, but the car was badly damaged, and our insurance won't cover all the repairs because of how the accident happened." The irony might have been amusing if it wasn't so predictable. "And let me guess, you can't afford to fix it after spending $65,000 to buy it in the first place." "It's worse than that," he continued. "The development project I was involved with has completely collapsed. There are lawsuits from investors, and I'm personally named in several of them because I vouched for the developer. We might lose the house, Amelia. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings." I sat back processing this information. The satisfaction I might once have felt at this karmic justice was tempered by genuine concern for my mother, who was undoubtedly suffering the consequences of decisions she hadn't made. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said finally. "We need about $30,000 to bring the mortgage current and negotiate with the bank." He admitted the words clearly painful for him. "I wouldn't ask if there were any other options. I've already sold my cars, liquidated my retirement accounts, borrowed from everyone willing to lend to us." The request was breathtaking in its audacity. After stealing $65,000 from me, he had returned only to ask for more. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, keeping my voice level with effort. "You took my savings without permission to buy Jessica a car she promptly wrecked, and now you want me to give you more money to save the house that I was never made to feel welcome in." "When you put it that way," he began defensively, then stopped himself. Something in his expression shifted, a recognition dawning that seemed to age him further. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing, and hearing it said aloud makes me realize how wrong it sounds." What happened next surprised both of us. My father, the man who had always maintained rigid control over his emotions, an image broke down in tears right there in the hospital cafeteria. Through halting confessions between sobs, a lifetime of truths emerged. "I've been managing money disasters for Jessica since she was 16, he admitted. Credit card debt, impulsive purchases, loans to friends who never repaid her. Your mother and I remortgaged the house twice to cover her expenses. The pattern just kept escalating, but I couldn't bring myself to let her face consequences." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious about the dynamic that had shaped our family for so long. "Why protect her from reality while expecting me to face it head on?" "Because she's so much like me," he said quietly. "The same impulsiveness, the same social nature, the same weaknesses. I saw myself in her, and I couldn't bear for her to struggle the way I did. You were always more like your mother's family, disciplined and self-sufficient. I told myself you didn't need the same support, but the truth is, I failed you by taking your strength for granted." This admission, more than any apology he could have offered, pierced through my defensive walls. For the first time, I could see my father not as the infallible patriarch who had wronged me, but as a flawed man perpetuating patterns from his own upbringing. Our conversation lasted nearly 3 hours, delving into family history I had never known. How my father had grown up with an alcoholic father who repeatedly gambled away the family's security. How he had vowed to create financial stability for his own children, but found himself enabling Jessica's irresponsibility out of his own unresolved trauma. None of it excused what he had done to me, but it provided context I had never had before. As our conversation wound down, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. When I answered, her voice was thin with anxiety. "Amelia, is your father with you? He left this morning saying he needed to make things right, but that was hours ago, and he wasn't answering his phone." "He's here, Mom," I said. "We've been talking." "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed, then hesitated. "Amelia, there's something you should know. I've left your father. After what happened with your savings and everything since. I'm staying with Grandma Rose until I figure things out. 32 years of marriage. And I finally realized I've been enabling patterns that hurt both my children in different ways. The revelation stunned me into momentary silence. My mother, who had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts rather than addressing them, had taken such a decisive step. "I'm proud of you, Mom," I said finally, meaning it deeply. "That couldn't have been easy. Nowhere near as difficult as what you did standing up for yourself when none of us had your back," she replied. "I hope someday you can forgive me for my part in all this. I should have protected you more." After ending the call, I looked across at my father, who sat deflated in his chair. The powerful real estate broker, the family patriarch who had always dictated terms to everyone around him, now seemed diminished to his essential self, a scared man facing the consequences of a lifetime of poor choices. "I can't give you $30,000, I said finally. "Even if I had it to spare, which I don't, it would only continue the cycle that got us here. But I can help in other ways if you're willing to accept my terms." "Anything," he said simply. "Professional financial counseling for starters. Real accountability for Jessica, who needs to understand her part in this situation. And family therapy if we're ever going to rebuild any kind of relationship." He nodded slowly. "That sounds fair. More than fair given everything." As he prepared to leave, looking exhausted but somehow lighter, I added one final condition. "And Dad, if we ever have any kind of relationship again, you need to understand that I will never, under any circumstances, be the family safety net. My financial boundaries are non-negotiable from this point forward." He nodded, accepting this fundamental shift in our dynamic. "I understand. And Amelia, despite everything, I am proud of the woman you've become. I just wish I could take credit for more of it." As I watched him walk toward the parking garage, shoulders bent, but steps determined, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The confrontation I had dreaded had actually provided a form of closure I hadn't known I needed. The family myths had been exposed, the painful truths acknowledged, and while reconciliation remained uncertain, at least we were finally dealing in reality, rather than comfortable illusions. 1 year after leaving Portland, I stood in the kitchen of my new Seattle apartment, brewing coffee and watching the morning light illuminate the city skyline. At 37, I had finally reached my revised savings goal with $90,000 set aside for a home down payment. The journey had taken longer than expected, but the delay had given me something equally valuable: clarity about what truly mattered in my life. My phone chimed with a payment notification. My father had been sending monthly transfers of $500 for the past 8 months, small but consistent repayments toward the money he had taken. The total repaid so far was just $4,000, a fraction of what had been stolen. But the regularity of the payments represented something more meaningful than the amount. According to my mother, he was working 2 jobs now, a humbling shift for a man who had once considered himself above such arrangements. These repayments had begun after my father finally sold their family home, downsizing to a modest apartment to avoid complete financial ruin. The process had been painful but necessary, forcing both of my parents to confront the consequences of decades of financial enabling. The foreclosure had ultimately been averted through a short sale, saving my father's credit from complete destruction, but leaving little equity after the mortgage was satisfied. My mother had maintained her separation, renting a small guest house behind my grandmother's home while working full-time as a teacher again. At 58, she was rebuilding her independence one step at a time, attending therapy, and learning financial literacy skills she had abdicated throughout her marriage. Our weekly phone calls had gradually evolved from awkward to genuinely warm, as she developed an identity separate from her roles as wife and mother. Perhaps the most surprising transformation had been Jessica's. The wreck of her Mercedes had become a turning point, especially after I insisted she be told the true source of the car's funding. The revelation had devastated her, initially triggering a defensive reaction that blamed everyone but herself. But as our family's financial house of cards collapsed around her, reality became impossible to ignore. Now 23, Jessica had secured steady employment as an administrative assistant, a less glamorous position than her marketing aspirations, but one that provided reliable income. She was attending financial literacy classes at the community college and had begun therapy to address the patterns of entitlement that had defined her early adulthood. Our relationship remained fragile, occasional text messages, and rare phone calls slowly rebuilding what years of parental favoritism had damaged. Family therapy sessions conducted via video call had been challenging, but essential. The first session had nearly ended in disaster with Jessica storming off camera after I detailed the impact of lifelong favoritism. Subsequent sessions improved gradually as our therapist helped establish ground rules that allowed difficult truths to be spoken without shutting down communication entirely. My own life had evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated. The temporary position at Northwest Memorial had become permanent when I was offered a nursing supervisor role with even better compensation. The promotion validated years of dedication to my profession and provided the security to finally begin serious house hunting in the Seattle market. Finding balance between self-protection and selective forgiveness had been my greatest challenge. Dr. Martin, my therapist, had helped me navigate this complex terrain, distinguishing between forgiveness that enabled further abuse and forgiveness that allowed me to release the burden of resentment while maintaining necessary boundaries. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone back into a position where they can hurt you again, she had explained during a particularly difficult session. It means acknowledging what happened, recognizing the humanity of those who hurt you, and choosing to free yourself from being defined by that pain. 3 months ago, I had made an offer on a small 2-bedroom house in a developing Seattle neighborhood. The closing process had been nerve-wracking, but yesterday I had received the keys, officially becoming a homeowner at last. The achievement felt particularly meaningful because I had done it completely independently without family assistance or the original savings that had been taken from me. The housewarming gathering scheduled for this weekend would include my new Seattle friends' coworkers, who had become like family, and somewhat tentatively my mother, who was making her first visit since I had moved. My father and Jessica had not been invited, a boundary I was maintaining until our healing process reached a more advanced stage. Looking back on the painful journey that had brought me to this moment, I recognized that the betrayal that had once seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of something essential: true independence, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically as well. The lessons had been hard-won but invaluable. I had learned that family loyalty must have limits when it becomes destructive, that boundaries are not selfish but necessary for healthy relationships, that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in harmful patterns, even when that refusal causes temporary pain. Perhaps most importantly, I had established a nursing scholarship for first-generation college students at my alma mater, funded by a small percentage of each paycheck. The scholarship represented my commitment to transforming personal pain into something constructive, helping others achieve the independence that had been so hard-fought in my own life. The trauma of betrayal had ultimately become the foundation for more authentic relationships in every area of my life. With colleagues, I no longer felt compelled to prove my worth through constant sacrifice. With friends, I could express needs and set boundaries without fear of abandonment. And with family, I was slowly rebuilding connections based on mutual respect, rather than obligation or guilt. As I prepared for my day, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me appeared confident, centered at peace with both her strengths and vulnerabilities. She had been tested by betrayal, but not defined by it, had experienced profound loss, but created something more valuable in its place: a life built on self-trust and emotional freedom. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, and perhaps it never would, but it had transformed into something like wisdom, a hard-earned understanding that sometimes the deepest wounds can ultimately lead to the most authentic healing. Have you ever had a family member betray your trust financially? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. While family relationships can be incredibly painful when boundaries are crossed, they can also be opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, but by the strength you find in standing up for yourself.